everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Insecure Agents podcast. I am your host, Allie Howe, and today we're thrilled to have Samuel Colvin, founder of Pydantic, with us today to talk about how the framework you use for building AI agents relates to your AI security posture and what's next for Pydantic. Samuel, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Samuel. I originally started Pydantic, the library, way back in 2017, and then started a company around it in beginning of 23. Yeah, and then here we are.
Amazing. Yeah. So today we're sitting in New York City, which is super exciting for us. That's the home of the Insecure Agents podcast. There's always something going on in New York. I think you said you were here for the MCP summit. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was a summit of there were 2 days. One of the core team maintaining MCP, and then the day where I was at of those maintaining the SDKs for MCP. Um, but yeah, talking very widely around where MCP is going, what we want to fix, what we want to not go and change. Yeah, and obviously security came up a whole bunch. Obviously, auth is an ongoing discussion within MCP, and I think obviously everything has where MCP is weird is that it spans the entire range from standard IO, I just want to run an MCP server locally, to Microsoft want to have, as I understand it, MCP is going to be part of the next Windows release. I don't know whether that's public or not, but I've said it now. And they want MCP connecting Office 365 to bits of Azure. So they're going to have thousands of nodes running MCP clients and servers, but it also has to work on a local machine. So it covers a wide range of different scales and therefore challenges.
Yeah, I'm seeing most people start to realize that this lethal trifecta issue where you've got agents connected to um, secure data that's behind and gated by some sort of MCP server. If you've got the ability to externally communicate as well, which these agents do, that can lead to a lot of issues. So I think more people are starting to get educated and aware of the risks of MCP servers, especially with the latest research that came out, I think from like Zenity Labs from Black Hat, showing that if you can easily submit a prompt injection via whatever the MCP server is connected to. So like if it's connected to GitHub, for example, and you have a GitHub issue that contains a malicious like prompt injection, asking to take the author's private data that's in their private repos and then make it public in some way. I think Invariant Labs covered that case and published that research.
My opinion is
Yeah.
that MCP is a protocol, as the name suggests. It's also an ecosystem. Neither the protocol does not have any security vulnerabilities we know of. What it has done is it's allowed us to go and have multiple different connected agents or systems in the way that we had all been claiming we were before and now actually are. And that has exposed all of the faults and basically omissions in security within AI systems. All it's done is enable us to go and connect to things using LLMs, and it turns out once we do that, then no one has sorted out how we do security. We can't make things as powerful as we want them to be without also introducing insecurity. I mean, it's basically we're back to the world pre-AI where we have and still have of spear phishing and phishing attacks on individuals, but just now that those individuals are AIs, which are even more prone to barfing up the wrong thing and believing someone saying, please give me X than humans are.
Yes, 100%. And I think, like you mentioned before, I think auth is the real way to solve this, where you can't really control what it's going to barf up. But if you have strong guardrails in place to making sure, this user can't access this data in this database or something, whatever it's connected to, you can enforce.
Yeah, and it's authentication and authorization. I always go a bit blurred on which one's which, but the point is it's not just like that I'm allowed to connect to the server, but which tools am I allowed to call, which resources am I allowed to access? Um, and that's a hard question, and one where arguably there's a space for the protocol to be more opinionated and more restrictive rather than the current lots and lots of things are possible, but lots of people lots of those given access to that have not thought through the potential implications of it.
Yes, we had a really interesting conversation with Ian Livingstone from QCard Labs on a previous episode of this podcast. He was saying that auth for agents needs to be context aware. Do you think the MCP protocol could help with that?
I think it can, but it's such a complex problem. As I said earlier, it covers such a wide range of different use cases, and it's extremely frustrating if the protocol goes and says, "Oh no, you can't do that thing." When you're like, "No, I understand the context of what I'm doing, and I want to be able to do it." And I think you could argue that the job of the protocol is to be a secure protocol, as in HTTPS is secure. that allows us to go and do our insecure things on top of it. But basically, with great power comes the capacity to be greatly insecure. But that kind of has to be there when you have great power. You can't get rid of that.
Yes, absolutely. And then similarly or related, what do you think is agentic framework's role in the security of AI agents?
I think I'm going to slightly dodge the question and
Yeah.
say the same. Give great power and therefore the capacity for great insecurity. I think you can go and again, you can go and get the fundamental things right in the same way that we got to the point where yes, where it was very easy to use that everywhere. We got rid of the whole Tron security issues. That doesn't mean that you can't go and use an API which allows you to access anyone's data. Uh, but at least we don't have someone else in my coffee shop can go and access your traffic and what site I'm looking at and what traffic's being transferred.
Yes. No, for sure. Absolutely. It's interesting too for me to think about how far we've come since the beginning of this year at the um, and AI Engineer Summit in New York City in February. One of the talks mentioned that you should not start with an agent framework. You should start from scratch, and then once you know like what you need, then you could add a framework on later before you have all this abstraction. Like, what's your take on that? Is that still sound
I think it's
advice?
bullshit. I think that lots of people got burnt by certain frameworks that I shan't name being overly abstracted and stepped back from let's use a framework to let's do it all from scratch. I think that if we think in web years, we're roughly around 98, 2002, something like that in AI. And I'm sure that if you went to Silicon Valley in those days, you would have found people with beards saying, I don't need to use a web framework. I'm going to parse all my HTTP headers myself because that's going to be much more performant. And why should I pay for the overhead of building a mapping for HTTP headers when I know I only need to access these two HTTP headers? Fast forward even 5 years, let alone 20 years, no one thinks it is credibly a useful thing to do to write the speed code to pass my HTTP request myself. We're going to go and use a web framework. And we're going to choose our web framework that is not too opinionated and does the right stuff. And we're going to go and say, for this thing, I want to use Flask. For this thing, I want to use Fast API. For this thing, I want to use Django. For this thing, I need to go and use Hyper and Rust. But we're not going to go and start parsing those headers ourselves. And I think it is the job of the framework to be just opinionated enough, provide the fundamentals that everyone wants to go and use, where it is easy to make security mistakes, but not be too overbearing and come along and tell you what paradigm you want to go and use on top of that. And I think that one of the things that has, end of last year, people were saying everything was about agents in the sense that the agent was the system, that this agentic loop solved everything. I think we are past thinking that the agentic loop solves everything. What I think has happened more implicitly and people haven't kind of acknowledged is, sure, I have to go and tether together 10 or 50 of those agentic loops, but the agentic loop is incredibly useful because basically anywhere where I'm doing structured data extraction, if I get back the wrong data, I want to pass it back to the agent. And that is like the simplest agentic loop. So everything becomes agent, but instead of the agent being a startup having one agent, a startup has 10 different agents. And so it needs to be really quick to go and build them. They need to be type safe to allow you to refactor them quickly, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the um, don't use a framework, just use the SDKs is purely a reaction to LangChain.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I remember too, I was doing some research and I was looking at different security vulnerabilities that certain frameworks had versus others. Um, it's amazing. Like some, I think Palo Alto's Unit 42 published some pretty bad vulnerabilities, honestly, for some other frameworks such as server-side request forgery and critical prompt injection, where whatever the user submitted, that could have been converted and used to run Python code. So that's basically like remote code execution, essentially. That's pretty severe.
Yeah, there've been some quite serious. I mean, I think there was a point where certain other frameworks I shan't name were basically the default way of getting access to variables within context within tools was go and put it in a system prompt, and then you can pull it out the system prompt, and the hopefully the LLM will take care of passing your Postgres DSN into the tool, and like sure, Pydantic AI doesn't stop you from doing that. If you are dumb enough to do that, we're not going to hold your hand and stop you doing that. What we are going to do is have a type safe, convenient way of passing dependencies into tools so that you can do it the correct way. So that's where I think you can make it a bit harder to go and do the insecure thing or a bit easier to do the secure thing.
But still giving freedom to make your own choice, which is nice.
Freedom to shoot yourself if you so wish.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And I know Pydantic also offers some features that, in my opinion, sound like, security advantages. There's a reason maybe you'd want to use Pydantic. So the MCP run Python server that you created for running Python code securely.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to ask an agent to run Python code, the idea that I think certain other frameworks, I think small agents for a while was like, we're going to try very hard to cut off bits of C Python that might do dangerous things, but still basically run C Python in your main interpreter. That seems to me like it's great for some local development trials, but you would never want to put anything like that into production. I think even MCP run Python has some like very edge-based security vulnerabilities that what's funny when people go and copy the things I've done, they often, they copy my mistakes as well, and that's always quite amusing to see. But even there, you can, if you really try, you can get access to the bit of the file system inside node modules, which I don't think represents the like remote code execution, but it definitely could allow you to somewhat taint the environment. So you need to be even there. You need to be careful about what you do. And I think in remote code, I have had a like sort of fascination with running insecure code for years and years. When I ran the previous company, we wanted to allow, it was a SaaS platform. We wanted to allow our developers to use Ginger templates, email templates, and even back then, that was like 2014. I was sort of shocked that it wasn't the go-to way of just like run Python code in a sandbox, and that still is unsolved. I think Pyodide and running it in a browser environment, as it were, gets us a long way, but even that doesn't fully solve it. And if you look at all these companies now, what are they called? E2E, is it? E2C, whatever that company, and uh, Daytona as well, who offer remote code, this offer like running untested code. They've all actually gone and used Docker containers that use basically infra isolation because running untrusted Python code is basically a fully unsolved problem still. But yet, Python is really the lingua franca of what models want to run, right? When the OpenAI or ChatGPT system prompt got leaked, it basically said if you're doing any calculation, use Python to do that calculation. And so we're moving to a situation where the way that models do any form of calculation is run some Python code. And so I think that still remains a bit unsolved. Currently, we're just basically throwing infra at the problem, throwing resources at the problem and spinning up Docker containers. But I would love it if there was a safe, fundamentally safe, like lower lift way of doing it than Docker containers.
Makes sense. Does TypeScript also suffer for these same problems?
Not really, because JavaScript. I mean, we have isolates, right? As in, we have had 20 years of browsers needing to be able to run someone else's code and not have access to system resources. So Dino, for example, has bulletproof isolation because fundamentally it's built on V8. And ironically, what we're using in MCP run Python, it's Dino to give you that same isolation, and then we're running Python inside JavaScript, basically, or inside the JavaScript WASM environment to get this isolation.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's a great tool for anyone that's trying to take, I guess, a user input and maybe run it as code, do it securely in isolation. That makes
And I
sense.
actually think Dino is an awesome company. I'm really impressed by what they've done. I'm surprised that they haven't done a better job of jumping on this sudden demand for run untrusted code. As far as I know, that's not something they've been pushing, and they absolutely should be because they could be killing it.
And yeah, it's interesting you say that. I feel like users are starting to become more savvy and aware of the security pitfalls that are at play and different solutions for them.
I agree. I think I was saying this to someone the other day. I think one of the problems we have in software development in general is that we have one word or a few different words, coder, developer, engineer, which covers an enormous range of different people. If you think about it in construction, we have the guy who carries bricks around the building site, and we have the structural engineer who designs the Burj Khalifa. And they are completely different names. It's very obvious to anyone, however involved in the construction industry, that they have very different skill sets in software where it is much harder to see it from the outside. And the nomenclature is terrible. We call those both of those people devs, and so we and that causes us all to kind of even as developers we bunch them all into one group of people. And there is maybe the lovable end of the spectrum is starting to be so clearly different that people are thinking of lovable developer or whatever you want to call those people as separate. But like for the vast majority, from people in their first week of coding through to experts, we still basically have one set of words, and so and therefore we bunch them all together, and we think of the security concerns as bunched together when they're actually very different. All hard for all those people, but different.
Yes, that makes sense. As you are you able to see if users become, like, more savvy over time or if they have different problems thanks to Logfire and the data that you're capturing there?
Yeah, I think that the Logfire is, I mean, for me, it is I mean, and obviously I'm very biased, but it is an amazing view into your application. I mean, I've been using Cloudflare Workers for years. The first time I hooked up Logfire to Cloudflare Workers, and I suddenly was able to see the latency between, like, I didn't know this, but like the latency of a KV store request when the key doesn't exist or the value doesn't exist is like 5x if it does exist. I never knew that. And suddenly you start thinking about building your application differently. Now, that in that case, it is about um, performance, not about security. But my friends at Prefect have just released Fast MCP Cloud. Then they want to work with Logfire to do the observability. So whatever it was 2 days ago, I hooked up Logfire to Fast MCP Cloud. Immediately saw, I won't say what they were, but I mean, it was like 2 days after I launched it. So this is not a criticism of them, but some stuff in the environment that shouldn't have been there. But that was like trivially obvious to see for me, but it's not obvious if you don't have the observability. So I think it is incredibly impactful, like being able to just have that view into what your application is doing. Just to be clear, FastMCP Cloud is awesome. I'm really looking forward to both using it and building with them. Yeah.
Amazing. So they help deploy MCP servers?
Yeah. So FastMCP is a library of its own for building MCP servers in Python, and they've now gone about a cloud service for deploying it, which is, I think, best in class right now for trying to deploy MCP servers.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. That makes sense. Are they helping at all with, like, scanning MCP servers for, like, tool poisoning or anything?
They're not doing any of that yet. I mean, to be clear, they've done an amazing job. They went from an idea to an open beta in 8 weeks. So, like what they have right now is deploying your server and an audit log, and you can connect Logfire for observability, and they're doing the registry stuff. I think they're really interested in that security side of things and moving into it. And I think it's clear that there is not a like VC scale business to be made out of getting individuals to deploy their MCP server. So obviously, the business here is an enterprise, and that's exactly the kind of solution they need to go and solve. But as companies like Vassal have demonstrated, starting with anyone can rock it and go and deploy it quickly is a great place to start for enterprise, for startup, for individuals, for everyone.
And circling back to observability, I think having something like Logfire or observability in general in place is important not only for performance but security as well to understand what your agent's saying. It seems like there's starting to be these infrastructure type platforms that are starting to emerge of like they're going to help you deploy your agent into production because I think a lot of people are finding that it's easy to create a proof of concept agent, but launching into production now we're talking about observability, we're talking about security, we're talking about evals, we're talking about these last mile problems that are very difficult to solve. Do you see frameworks like their role in that to be helping build those types of infrastructure in place or no?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think, Fast MCP Cloud is a good example of that. I think we have toyed with the idea of having deployment for Pydantic AI. I think MCP is the obvious way to expose it, A2A being the other one. And so I'm a fan of Fast MCP Cloud, and I'm constantly looking for things I don't have to build. So I think for the foreseeable future, that's going to be our go-to. If you want to deploy a Pydantic AI agent, you use Fast MCP Cloud. But I mean, yeah, I think there are enormous number. Like, if a lot of it is similar to the kind of Heroku and the Heroku successors. But I remember thinking when I was, very inexperienced, 2014, first deploying stuff onto Heroku and discovering that there was no security help. Like if you wanted to, someone took our SaaS platform down by leaving their phone on their F5 key, and it like held the F5 key down. The endpoint, the screen they were on, would made a bunch of different database queries. Our system was down for half an hour until we rang and asked them to like stop pressing F5, and there was nothing built in to go and help you with that. I think the Cloudflare is a big step in that, and it's amazing that systems like Heroku didn't have a Cloudflare equivalent like reverse proxy in front. But I think that as the bit of user code gets smaller and smaller, and therefore we deploy more and more of these services, the importance of built-in security and built-in auth and stuff like that only gets more and more important. And yeah, auth is something that FastMCP Cloud goes and solves on day one, in a way that like the HTTP platforms never did.
Yeah, I think that's really important for the future of trustworthy AI, having some sort of secure by default in place. That's really interesting that they're adding auth in as well. How did they do that? Or
Well, they're lucky because auth is built into MCP, and so there is a protocol for it. Sure, technically there's basic auth in HTTP, but no one wants to go and use that, so you can't go and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna add auth into my HTTP PaaS platform." I think the other similar space is in security within the call to the LLM, and that's something where we've been talking to a number of security companies about how there's way more that we can do there. If we can intercept at the LLM call and either block it right there and then, as in we're talking about building very small models that can detect security vulnerabilities as the basically during the request. So you've got, in theory, if you've got a request that takes 3 seconds, you've got 3 seconds of window in which you can go and do your own check. Was the prompt malicious? And then basically cut off the response. Um, or quite often, no one actually manages to hack a system in a single prompt. So if you maybe you got 5 minutes until they've actually hacked it to go and look at their requests and be like, this request is obviously malicious, and then go and block them. And so we have some products we haven't announced yet that will be the infra for that, and then we're working with security companies to solve that exact problem because it is completely unsolved at the moment. I think presumably the big foundational models are trying to go and solve it, but if one of them has a good solution and you want to use someone else's model, you're out of luck. So I think there's an enormous space for gateways that are intelligent enough to do security. There's been lots and lots of noise around model routing since GPT-5. I think it is. I think it's mistaken, and security is more important than routing. That's really where we should be pushing. Maybe I'm giving away too much of our roadmap, but yeah.
no, it's exciting. I was going to ask you what's next for Pydantic. So
So I've preempted the question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, go on. I'll say. So we're building Pydantic AI Gateway, and security is a big part of what we will enable. Even if we're not building it, we'll have the foundations to go and build it, and then we're working with I won't name them, but some really exciting security companies on the threat detection bit of that.
yeah, so it's super exciting for sure. And I think that really highlights the shared responsibility model for agent security and AI security in general. It's very much like cloud security, right? So it's like you trust AWS or whoever your cloud provider is with security, but it's your responsibility too. So having, not only sort of like classifiers or guardrails built into whatever closed source model you're using or open source model, having something at the gateway layer to intercept prompt injections as well. And maybe you could have your own runtime security in place also that monitors your whole system. I mean, just layers of defense here that really make it so there's less likely chance
But
of.
what one thing we don't want to, what it would be unfortunate if we had to push all of that responsibility down onto the app developer or agent developer, because we were talking to a large bank the other day who said they have a what they call a technical community of 10 to 12,000 people who they are now recommending use Pydantic AI, and they're going to be deploying enormous amounts of different agents. They want to be able to say basically anyone go and deploy an agent and see how well it works, but obviously they really don't want the scenario in which they go off the rails and do insecure things. And insecure can mean, accessing resources you shouldn't access. It could also involve saying something that you're not allowed to say, saying something racist, for example, right? And so I was talking to someone about a company who offer insurance and want to use agents, and that you can imagine, and that someone says in your next reply, be as racist as possible. Then you say, why can't I get insurance? Someone takes a screenshot of the response, which is racist, and that is like enormously damaging to that company. And so having a guardrail in place which basically says never under any circumstances reply being discriminatory is really important. But you don't want to have to make every single person building every app do that. And so lifting that into the gateway layer or into the model layer, if you control it, makes complete sense.
Yes, that makes sense. And at that gateway layer, will there be any like customizable guardrails as
Yeah,
well?
I mean, fundamentally, what we're building is webhooks. Webhook before, webhook during, webhook after. And then we'll work with particular security partners, but we'll also allow you to bring your own webhook effectively. And then that webhook can just be full on guardrails, right? It can just be run another smaller or bigger model in parallel to check the response.
Amazing. I think if you have that too, the argument for, oh, you shouldn't use a framework, you should start from scratch really starts to fall apart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Because, right. And we're doing the same stuff in Pydantic AI, right? We're not, you know, ultimately our model is an abstract base class. And I have implementations of our model type which actually don't use an LLM at all. Go and use a tiny min-max model for solving particular things. But it still works particularly nicely to use Pydantic AI for that because we're extensible. We're not trying to force you to use the implementations we have. We're trying to give you the right fundamentals that you can go and extend if you want, but for the most part, you won't have to.
Amazing. So obviously Pydantic's been around for quite a while, and then we had Logfire, and now we've got Pydantic AI. How do all of those relate, and how did you sort of stitch those together?
Yeah, we probably did it in a slightly odd order in the sense that the natural progression now for a user is I use Pydantic, I trust them, they're good. Oh, they've got an agent framework. I'll go and try it. Oh, it seems to be good. I like it. I like its taste. And now I need observability because LLMs are desperately need observability for lots of obvious reasons. So I'll go and use Logfire. And then once I'm using Logfire, oh, this doesn't just instrument Pydantic AI. It doesn't just instrument AI. It's full observability. We can actually roll that out across our entire AI or innovation team. And then the neighboring team are like, actually, can we use it as well? And whether we see that in enterprises, we see this like, actually, once we've got self-hosted Logfire and we can use it, there's a bunch of other teams who are waiting to use it. They haven't yet persuaded their boss we need to rip out Datadog and move to Logfire, but now we've got the cluster and I can go and use it. I'm actually going to use it instead of Datadog or Elk or whatever else. But I think the interesting thing for us has been the how fast Pydantic AI has grown. We're weird as a company. We are very bad at getting GitHub stars. We are very good at getting downloads. So today, even till now, I think Pydantic AI has like 12K stars or something. I mean, really not very many in the scheme of things. And yet we've gone from releasing in December to now having overtaken all of the agent frameworks apart from LangGraph and LangChain, stayed ahead of the new agent framework, and I think pulling away from Google ADK and OpenAI agents. There is whatever trillion of market cap building agent frameworks. I'm not saying that's the only thing they're doing, but there is serious interest in that space. And our approach of no frills, build the right layer of abstraction, do that well, try not to move too fast and only build things when they're good seems to have appealed to people. And I think that is a reflection on the fact that 2025 has been the year that AI hype has turned into AI adoption. There's still a lot of hype, but suddenly we've gone from some product manager has been trying something through to the engineering team are told to put this into production. And the engineering team find Pydantic AI superior to the alternatives, is what is suggested by the download curve.
Yes, and that makes sense. And when you get into that adoption piece, those cracks start to show. And if you've got good, solid fundamentals, then
Yeah.
you're in a good
And I
place.
think we saw a lot with other agent frameworks that were much more expansive in terms of their feature set, but limited in terms of how well they worked when you started to scale both the size of the application and traffic. People actually wanted to go back. And I suppose in some sense, Pydantic AI, going back to your earlier question about should I just use the SDK, Pydantic AI is kind of probably more minimal step on top of just use the SDK than some frameworks where they're like, we'll tell you how to do RAG, we'll tell you how to do all of the vector search, everything else. Here is our way of building React agents. Here's our way of doing deep agents. Instead, here are the right fundamentals. You're an adult, go and do it yourself.
Yes, that makes sense. And one other thing I was really curious to ask you is what's it like as a founder of an agent framework? How do you know like what to put in your roadmap, what to chase with like new protocols that come out, new technologies? How do you know what's going to stay and what's worth chasing?
I was thinking that actually on the walk here and thinking how it, as a founder, you have a view of the world, and the more opinionated your view of the world is, the more you succeed when you get it right, and the harder it is when you get it wrong. Because if you're like 1 degree off, but you only have 1 degree of width in your view of the world, you have nothing. And obviously, the hard thing when your view of the world doesn't match reality is, am I ahead of my time? Am I going to be right? Or am I just completely wrong? And I think that there was a situation a year ago where my view of the world, that AI was still engineering and the same security concerns and the same scalability concerns and the same engineering concerns applied, didn't match reality. And people were saying, oh, I can go and use this thing that in my engineering judgment was obviously wrong, but it seems to be working. And it feels great now that my view of the world seems to be more closely matching reality. As in, people are now taking those engineering concerns and those security concerns really seriously rather than YOLO deploy and now we have 1 million revenue in a month and everything's great.
Amazing. It feels very similar to when people say, "Oh, you need to have taste when it comes to evaluating like AI outputs and verifying them." Having an opinion is something that's hard to do because sometimes you get it wrong, and sometimes people don't share those opinions. But I think just in general, being willing to be opinionated allows you to be successful. So that's really cool to see.
If you get it right. But
If you're right.
if your view of the world is fundamentally behind rather than ahead, or just outright wrong, you're in lots of trouble. So that's the scary thing, right? When your view of the world doesn't match reality, you have to do one of two brave things. Either you have to realize you're wrong and change, or you have to stick to your guns even though everything doesn't agree with you. Those two things are both quite scary.
That's very scary. That's true, but no reward without all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
risk, of
yeah, yeah.
course.
Oh, for the most part,
Yeah.
running a company is a, incredibly high upside, and in the scheme of most people in history, pretty low downside. So I think, for the most part, it's a luxury.
So in my work in my day to day, I talk to teams and I help them with AI security. And in doing so, I've really become to try to understand what is the recipe for trustworthy AI. There's different technologies and different companies that I think play a big part in that. Um, I think frameworks also play a part in that as well. How do you see Pydantic AI contributing to building trustworthy AI?
So I think, presumably, there are multiple different dimensions of trustworthiness in AI. There is the security component, which is, I guess, is where your main interest is, but there's also just reliability. Does it do the right thing? I think the first step to trustworthy AI is using AI in the right domain. If you are trying to extract structured data from an email or a PDF or something, you can do that. If you are trying to use an AI to give people medical advice, you're going to have a much harder time because it's a fundamentally more difficult problem. The evals of does this app make someone stop smoking fundamentally take 40 years of whether did that person ever smoke again. And so the first step is use it in the right domains. And there are actually you can boil an awful lot of AI usage down to a relatively small set of cases, and even within them, the ones that work and don't work. I think that is the main thing. And then it is building the right primitives in that space. So if you want to take the extracting structured data from emails, you want to use structured data extraction, whether you use tools or JSON schema or structured outputs in some of the models, you want to be able to do schema validation and reflection on that. Those are basically primitives at this point that you want to use a framework for. Pydantic AI does that well. We're not the only one, but I think we do it better. So I think that's a big part of it. And then it's again, it's all just engineering. It's like having good documentation that was written by a human who understood the thing, who probably wrote the code, is going to make it a lot easier to build a trustworthy AI system if you're not trying to work out what happened or read the source code to work out how it all's supposed to work.
Yes, I like that mention of reliability. I think that's really important. And AI that is not on topic is also like not only a security concern, but it's of course just a performance issue. Like if your AI is not performant, then no one's going to use it. It's not going to be revenue generating. So I think trustworthy AI is something people should really be interested in because trustworthy AI is revenue generating AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And non-trustworthy AI, we've all had instances of some GitHub did it a bit where they put AI buttons all over GitHub. Half of them did nothing or didn't work properly. Not did nothing, but actively didn't were not trustworthy. And so that damaged the reputation of AI within GitHub because people stopped pressing the buttons. Now GitHub's AI review is actually usable, but I think it's probably clicked significantly less than it would otherwise be because they spammed AI buttons all over the place without making them good. And so non-trustworthy AI harms AI adoption, among other things, because people get burnt one or two times, and then they're like, "Am I going to use this?" I know, for example, PagerDuty has an AI button. I have not clicked it, and that is not to say it's good or bad. It is that I just assume it is no good, and that was because it came out around the same time as those GitHub buttons that was not working. I don't have a particularly high opinion of PagerDuty's UX, so I assume their AI functionality is not going to work. So yeah, it's compounding. Basically, if you build trustworthiness in AI, people will go on and use it.
Is there anything else that's coming for Pydantic that you wanted to highlight today or anything we didn't talk about?
I think we're pretty flat out. So Pydantic AI V1, I think that's really important. That is whether I don't actually know whether we got around to releasing V1 last night or whether it will be over the weekend or Monday morning. But we've been a bit slow. We promised it in July, and we're now going to have V1 by end of August or the 1st of September. But I think we will be the first of the major agent frameworks to go V1, and at enterprise in particular, having that confidence. One, you have the confidence in Pydantic because of you've used Pydantic for years and you probably trust our engineering. You've probably got some trust in Pydantic AI by now that that our taste in not being overbearing is right. But now you have the trust that we have a stable release. We're not going to go and break things. If we break things, you get to shout at us and be like, "You broke that thing," and we will try very hard not to, whilst continuing to add features. I think that will be really important. Whether you call that security or whether you just call that like good engineering practice is, you know, kind of not the point. So Pydantic AI V1 coming now. Full issue support in Logfire. So that flow of basically building up different consistent exceptions into one issue is going to be really helpful. Something people got used to and that we're adding now properly. And then evals functionality, full evals functionality in Logfire. We've dipped our toe in it before. We built a few different things. Nothing really works. So we now have full support for offline evals. And we're working on combining that with the online eval stuff, which is, in my opinion, I know I could talk for an entire podcast about evals, but like, I think that evals are too complicated at the moment and we need something easier to do. And I think that's where we're going to get to next is the online evals, point and click at whether or not the agent did well or badly. And now we have a golden data set. Now we can run the evals. And they obviously can cross over with security as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, evals are very close to security. It can be used they can help implement your guardrails too if you find this continuous cycle for sure. Well, so that's very exciting. So we've got improvements in observability. We've got more guardrails. We've got big changes for Pydantic. I'm excited for you. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the gateway that is as yet, well, it's announced now, but we're hoping to have a public beta in September of that. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, where can people follow Pydantic to stay up to date on these releases?
Oh, we're really bad at being good at that. Well, we'll try and blog about the main things, and I'll be very vocal on Twitter and LinkedIn. So there.
Amazing. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. For everyone, that was Samuel Colvin, founder of Pydantic, and that wraps up for this episode of Insecure Agents. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.